It is more natural to say that a horse is useful to his rider than that the rider is useful to his horse. Yet with a strange egotism, peoples ridden by governments talk of the uses governments may have for them, rather than of the uses they have for their government. We have just seen how governments may indeed be useful, even when moved by the crudest self-interest, as horse breeders and trainers are useful to horses, which they breed scientifically and keep fit and well fed. Some romantic person might here suggest that to be tamed is to be degraded, that the wild ass is infinitely superior to the market donkey, and that the Mustang leads a happier life than the hunter or the war horse. If any polite admirer of barbarism sincerely holds his view, he may not be easy to refute, but he may be invited to retire unmolested into the wilderness he loves. He will probably not be happy there for long, because shelter and society under a government are a relief and become a necessity to anyone whose vital liberty tends to grow rational. The simile of horses and riders may seem inapplicable to politics, since in this case both horse and rider belong to the same species, and there is no such diversity of endowment between the governed and the governing as between the strength and speed of horses and the agility of man. With his ingenuity in making halters, bits, whips, and spurs, no, there is not among men any such physical diversity, but it is within the human sphere the human capacity branches into endless moral diversity, and the inventions, virtues, and thoughts of some become the guide, the defense, the prison, or the death of others. Perhaps if all men had been born similar in capacity as they are born similar in helplessness, government would never have arisen among them. They might have remained like other mammals, partly gregarious and partly segregated at the breeding season. The development of mankind, however, has been diversified, and when obviously different tribes and races, speaking racially distinct languages, became rivals for ranging over the same good territory, it was inevitable that the stronger became disciplined, and more militant should press hard upon the more peaceful and more thinly scattered. If these could not develop adequate defense, nothing remained for them except servitude or extinction. Migration, as appeared in colonizing of North Africa, was only a source of greater weakness in the natives who withdrew, and of greater strength in the strangers who took possession. From the point of view of the subject people, the chief benefit hoped for, if not found, in possessing a strong government was a modicum of protection. A leader or a band that had become master over them might prove victorious over their other enemies. It might secure a temporary peace both from raiding strangers and from violence at home. For this boon, the people must be content to pay tribute in supplies and in labor, and on occasion, however clumsily and unwillingly, to serve in the government's army. Meantime, there is something else secured by a settled, authoritative government, a moral peace unknown both to the wild man and to the emancipated soul. Even in the jungle, where savage life seems to the traveler so poor and monotonous, the insecure spirit, in its solitude and incoherence, suffers from waking dreams, notions, and fixations, which make existence an incubus when it is not a mad hunt or digestive torpor. Recognized public authority, a chieftain, or a tradition vested in priests or elders, diffuses in society a moral peace, a refuge from vain sorrows and vain doubts and vain family quarrels. This authority is religious rather than political, but religion would only be another problem, another enemy, if it were not established by custom, not sanctioned by superstitious awe and a sense of invisible or unavoidable perils. Where such an established authority fails, moral society is dissolved, so that the autocratic voice of religion, echoing from the night of time and supported by the daily suasion of a living society, is needed to save that society from moral anarchy. and from political sedition. It is not, I think, against political governments that the free soul protests with the greatest force and conviction. There were worse and less explicable constraints imposed by animal instincts and passions that had to be heeded in order that mankind should exist at all. What dangers, what battles, what obligations had to be faced and accepted by the wild solitary soul in obeying the summons of sexual, parental, and gregarious impulses. When those seasons of mad adventure have passed, with what a mingling of epic wonder and sage horror would not an aged eagle or an aged bull remember his past? It is the contrary native compulsions and revenges of life at this first stage that form the substance of Greek tragedy, crimes of wild will against the bonds of custom and blood, which provoked counter-crimes against those very bonds, and brought madness and death to the individual heroes, while provincially establishing political order in the world. Rebellions against this order, when established, can never be so radical or so tragic. Nature has gradually compelled the will to organize and limit its impulses. The anarchic hero is exterminated. The plotting citizen survives. The pressure that government exerts on an individual who is tolerably tame, though it is more pervasive, is less felt and seems less brutal than that which nature and other wild men exerted on him in the jungle. Here lies the first utility of governments. It solves quietly problems that beset primitive life without ever being solved. Precarious hunting yields to much less precarious agriculture, and the quarrels that would have ended in murder and hereditary feuds are solved by relieving both sides of a constant fear of violence. Insofar as people love to be quiet or to practice liberal arts, this relief seems to them a clear blessing. Yet peace, though it is prerequisite for the birth and pure growth of life, is not the initial object pursued by it. On the contrary, the first sign of life is initiative, or primal will, a sudden spasmodic effort to exercise power and see what happens. The act, if unimpeded, and its product is satisfying, become the fixed objects, so far, of that will, and it becomes thereby the mortal enemy of everything that might stop such exploits in the future. Budding life is weak, and it needs peace and a favorable soil to strengthen it. But when strong and well knit, life becomes brave, even truculent. It declares war on all its enemies, without knowing who they may be. And if its immediate neighbors at first are by nature friendly to it, it flourishes confident and self-satisfied. If a pure vegetative soul of this kind could think, it would say that it loved only the good and had nothing to fear, which morally is true enough, since death overtakes it before it understands anything. Primal will, or blind initiative of this kind, remains fundamental for the organism in all its animal phases, so that a man, beneath his intelligent perceptions and arts, retains a pervasive blind courage and absolute willfulness. This private economy of the organic psyche is deeper than all that it has been bent to concede in circumstances, and it exercises a pervasive pull over the moral incrustations that, in arming the will for action, oppress its primal liberty. Thus, like the hidden fires of a volcano, inner energy, convinced of its own rightness, will burst spasmodically into civil and rational life. In modern philosophy, it has been largely dominant and is called egotism. This is the radical source of hostility to all alien forces and authorities, and especially in politics, to the government, of whatever kind or party it may be. It is also the source of crime against individuals by other individuals whom the government arrests and imprisons, and sometimes it causes the most ardent haters of government to appeal to government against the agents of the government itself. This theme fills the pages of legend and history, where we find passionate appeals against official decrees or unjust sentences of some local judge that brought indignant vassals and weeping women to the foot of the throne. And the chief function of monarchs, when they were good and beloved by the people, seemed to be to redress the wrongs done by their own governments. It is true that these subordinate officers were often closer to the people, with more ancient and indispensable functions to perform in society than had the suzerain himself. We might also liken a government to a Tower of Babel, in which every platform is raised in the hope of correcting the mischief done by the structure on which it rests. So all modern parties and ideologies savor the protestation, hatred, and rebellion against government as it exists, and as each reforming party pushes its way by denunciation to power, and by denunciation is presently destroyed. A prodigiously complex legislation and organization, every part inspired by a grievance, imprisons vital liberty and condemns it to perpetual forced labor. This perpetuity of civil war, crime, conspiracy, and latent insurrection does not contradict the initial need of government and its continued utility. It was needed in the first nest, or hut, in which prehistoric man reared his family, and it remains natural and indispensable at every stage of social and industrial complication. So as life has grown more diversified, it has brought more difficulties and predicaments, or rather, it has multiplied and varied the occasions on which the eternal difficulty and predicament of existence confronts the living individual. The arts are simply the methods by which the psyche meets these challenges, and, if it survives, accepts them. Acceptance is much easier for the blind will to live than it would be to an enlightened will that knew the past and the future. To a philosopher, watching the storm, the waves may seem mountain high and endless, for although this storm will pass, no end of others will follow. But to the laboring ship, or lifeboat, or shipwrecked passenger with his lifebelt, only one wave at a time, one blast, or one ducking, threatens to be fatal. The crisis at each moment is unavoidable. It may be surmounted. In any case, it will solve itself. What is beyond, to the will, is out of sight. So is what went before. Action first casts the die, or casts the knot, then reason writes the commentary. In a world of miscellaneous interests, controlled by a government, an absence of such control may be equally useful in different directions. Absence of control remains the ideal of enterprise in its active phase, but control becomes useful in preserving the fruits of enterprise. Free trade may be useful for commerce and protection for industry. An aristocratic domination, in its austere phase, may exalt the arts by demanding strict styles and grand monuments, and in its luxurious phase may patronize decorative ingenuity and variety. But it is not in anticipation of such incidental and contrary fruits that any form of government arises or endures. The demands of society must take shape spontaneously, as do the primary needs of life, and government, or traditional order, which is one of these primary needs, will then prove useful for thwarting each of the other interests alive in its world, without having taken them for its object, or drawing from them its proper authority and power. Government is only one force among many social and historical forces. They interact, affecting and transforming one another, and it is idle to expect government to be favorable to arbitrary interests that have not been among the social habits and material conditions that gave it birth. These, indeed, meant it to be useful, and will become its enemies if, on the contrary, they suffer from its interference. But the effects of government, like the created interests that buttress any abuse or delusion, will not prove that it was useful if by creating those morbid interests it ruins its normal adherence and destroys itself.